questions? Does anybody have questions from homeworks or the whatnot? What do you guys think? Homework questions or anything like that? Yeah, Daniel. 46. All right. So when we look at 46, hopefully we recognize that this looks suspiciously like one of these quadratics, since I see a squared term, a linear term, and a constant term. So I'm going to move everything onto one side. So I'll subtract 6 sine x from both sides, and then add 5 to both sides so that it's equal to 0. And then if we just say we pretend that sine x is really just a y, looks like that, right? So to solve this quadratic, I notice this one is factorable, so I would choose to do that over the quadratic formula if I can see it's easily factorable. Two things that multiply to give me positive 5, and then add to give me negative 6 are negative 1 and negative 5. Good there. Now that it's factored, I just apply the zero product property, so I can set each factor equal to 0. So I get y equals 1 and y equals 5. But don't forget, not solving for y, we're solving for sine x. So let's put that sine x back in. So sine x equal to 1, where we're all ready to go, let's just go to our unit circle and look up where the y coordinate is 1. If I drop in my unit circle, add a couple of extra marks in there. Go away. So where the y coordinate is 1 is just here at pi over 2. And now here I'm going to go to the unit circle and look for where the y coordinate is 5. So if I go and I look, 0, half, check, there aren't any. And in fact, if I remember way back in chapter 3 when we talked about the graphs of sine and cosine, remember the range for sine and cosine are both from negative 1 to positive 1? In fact, it's impossible for sine to output a value bigger than 1 or less than negative 1. So this piece just has no solution. So here's my answer for part A. For part B, I just take that answer and then say, okay, that and everything coterminal to it. Part C, we're looking at stuff between, what is it now? I got to go back and look. Negative 2 pi to positive 2 pi. So if I add 2 pi to a half, that's going to be more than 2 pi, right? If I subtract 2 pi from a half, that'll be okay. That'll give me negative 1.5. So just that and pi are my only two answers for part C. For part D, we had negative pi to 4 pi. So negative 1.5 pi is too small, so my first answer is just going to be that pi over 2. If I add 2 pi to that, I get 5 pi over 2, 2.5, that's okay. If I add another 2 pi, again, that'd be 4.5, and that's too big. So those are going to be my only two answers for that interval. Daniel, is that okay? Were you concerned at what to do with this? No. Oh, okay. So yeah, I'm just using, taking this and adding 2 pi or subtracting 2 pi until I get answers inside or outside. I stop adding once I get one that's outside, and I stop subtracting once I get one that's too small. So it's pretty easy because it was just 1 to check. And it's a half, which makes the arithmetic a little bit easier if you're just adding 2 to a half. So, cool. Other questions? Okie dokie. If you change your mind, you can ask me individually. Today you guys are going to be working on putting together your half sheet of notes and your review. So just as a reminder, the test format here is a little bit different than the usual. So the test will have 10 total questions on it. You're only responsible for answering 8 of them. The first 4 questions are required questions. The first 2 are going to be simplification questions, like the first part of the review. The second 2 questions will be solving problems, like the second half or part of the review. And the third part of the test will be the trig identity questions. You'll have 6 of those. You only need to answer 4. So you can pick any 4 that you want. It gives you a little bit of freedom to go, I tried this one. I don't feel like I'm making any progress. It feels like it's going to be a whole lot of time suck, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but this doesn't feel right, to just skip that one and go on and try something else. When you're doing that, keep in mind that these identities are not ordered from like easiest to hardest. In fact, there's not really easiest to hardest for these. If you see what to do, you see what to do, and it's usually easy. If you don't see what to do, even if it's easy to someone else, it could be hard to you if you don't kind of see the way through it. Again, so that having some ability to choose which ones you want to do is quite helpful. When it comes to what you're doing on the test, I'm going to be a little bit picky about one thing here, and that the questions you want me to skip and not to grade, I need you to clearly mark that. So like, if this is your test and you don't want to do, say, like number 25, I don't want like a little this. I want like, give me a big giant X. Don't waste any pencil lead. Like, make it super duper clear that that's the one you don't want me to do. Like, fill up the entire space with an X so it's like unmistakable that this is the one you're skipping. If I don't see an X, I'm going to assume you want me to grade it even if it's blank. So probably don't want to do that. For the most part, in terms of these identity questions, up to like 3 points or maybe 4, depending on like what you've actually done, of your partial credit is just going to be from doing things correctly. So if you use an identity correctly, that's like picking up a point. If you do an algebra thing correctly, that's like picking up a point. Up to like 3 or 4, depending on how close you get to the finish. Even if you can't get to the finish and like can't get it to work, if you've done good stuff, you've used identities correctly, you've done algebra correctly, even if you've made a mistake in there somewhere along the line and you weren't able to get to the finish, I can give you a lot of partial credit for doing things correctly. Do you guys get what I'm looking for on a partial credit standpoint? Now, if you replace cosine with sine or something, like that gets you nothing. That's wrong. If you get the things to match up because you did some made up algebra or you didn't show enough steps, that's a place where I'd have to take points, right? So in general, I want to make it easy to pick up that partial credit, though. Another piece that I'm going to be a little bit picky, or I'll be reasonably picky about on your test, is especially on these identities, is your organization of your work. Now, we took a homework quiz. I have to pass them back. I have them here. Some of you guys are reasonably okay and worked fairly linearly. Some people were like, they did some work over here and they kind of run up there and they kind of went across, and like it's a spiral of like work going around the, like that's a disaster for me to try to sort through. That's a pain. I don't want to have to do that. I will be picky if your work is not reasonably well organized, if there's not like equal signs or arrows or something from one step to the next step to the next step to make it clear like what you're doing or how you're proceeding through the problem. So please, while you're working, try to keep that in mind, to be as neat and organized as you possibly can. I know for some of us that's an incredible challenge, but I'm going to warn you right now that if I can't understand what you did to move from step to step, or if I can't follow what's the order of steps, I'm going to mark down. Okay? So let's not try to lose points for organization purposes. That's a lousy way to lose points, but part of what you're doing here is communicating your understanding, and organization is part of that communication, right? Even if you understand the English novel, if you can't write in complete sentences, it's going to be, you're going to give a bad grade on that essay. You know what I mean? Because you just can't communicate your understanding. Same idea here. With your test, you're going to get the same identity handout that I've given you in class. I will provide it. You're going to get a fresh, clean one with no marks on it. So if you've added any different versions of any of the identities on your identity sheet, though what you've added to your identity sheet will not be on the identity sheet I give you for the test. It'll be a fresh one with no writing on it. If those are things that you don't want to have to generate again, those should go onto your note cards. Like if you want 1 minus sine squared equals cosine squared, because that's not directly on the identity sheet, we got it from rearranging P1, I would include that on my note sheet. But in terms of things for your note sheet, like facts, that would be the only things I would worry about fact-wise, is if you had some of those alternate versions of your identity. Past that, I would fill my note sheet with example problems, or maybe some of the tips in terms of like, oh, what are good things to do in a simplifying or verifying problem, like making common denominators or rewriting things in terms of sines and cosines, or like making that difference of two squares pattern. I might write down some of those hints if they're not, that toolbox is not obvious to you. Is everybody okay there? Yes. No. Because basically there's nothing to put in there but examples, unless you want to write down some extra versions of identities that aren't on the typed out identity sheet. Also, my recommendation for you is to really do the review, particularly the verifying problems. You may see things that are very close to being the same thing, or maybe even exactly the same thing as some of these things on the review. The verifying problems I've given you on your test are all reasonably straightforward problems, like could be done optimally in like 2 to 4 steps, are not massively difficult. Don't employ any tricks we haven't used and you haven't seen, either in the homework or in the notes or doing review problems or whatever. So I'm not gonna I didn't cook up anything where it's like, hey, look at this. I'm gonna have to do some weird factoring that we haven't ever talked about before to do this one or something, like I didn't do anything like that. They're all relatively straightforward, employing the same general techniques we've used over and over and over again. And in fact, some of them may be almost the same or possibly exactly the same of things that we've done before. Does anybody have questions about like test format or expectations or anything like that? You guys have a pretty clear idea of like what you need on your identity sheet or on your note card, or what to prepare for. Should be pretty clear. It's basically like the review. The only questions on the test are the exact same kinds of questions that are on the review. There's just 3 types of questions: simplify, solve, verify. None of them employ a trick that isn't really present on the review. You get an identity sheet. Very cool? Okay. I'm going to stop talking now. You guys can get to work on getting your stuff together. If you have individual questions, I'm happy to take individual questions at my desk. Nick, what's up? Absolutely.